September 7th, 1890, the Boston Herald. Last week, I took a drive to visit Mr. Frederic E. Church, the celebrated landscape painter. About 30 years ago, he came up the Hudson River seeking a site for a home. He explored the territory on both banks until at last his artistic eye selected a location unsurpassed by any of the numerous charming places on the river.
It was 1844, and Frederic Church, at the age of 18, had high ambitions to excel in art. He began studying with Thomas Cole, America's foremost landscape painter. Cole took the young Church sketching through the Catskills and the Hudson River Valley. On one of their outings, Church drew the view from a high point known as Red Hill, near the city of Hudson. After completing his studies, Church began sketching and painting the New England landscape. Like Cole and the other Hudson River School painters, Church believed that nature was filled with spiritual meaning. His paintings appealed to a young nation enthralled with its natural heritage. Church began creating grand panoramic paintings, inspired by his vision that the Americas were a new Eden. Niagara portrayed the raw power of the natural world. Twilight in the Wilderness celebrated the peace and hopefulness of untouched nature. Heart of the Andes captured a continent fresh from the act of creation. Church ambitiously promoted his paintings. Crowds gathered at gallery showings around the country and in Europe. By the age of 33, the shy New Englander had become a national celebrity. At one of his showings, Church met the cultivated and accomplished Isabel Carnes. Soon, they were engaged. With the wedding just months away, Frederic went in search of a country retreat where Isabel and he could build a home and start a family. His search ended at a farm near Hudson, just below the hill where he had sketched the view 14 years earlier.
Mr. Church's estate embraces an area of between 200 and 300 acres, with excellent driveways whose total length is 6 or 7 miles. The art of the landscape gardener has been employed, not so much to render the estate beautiful as to make it picturesque.
After their marriage, the Churches built a cottage designed by New York City architect Richard Morris Hunt. Here, their children Herbert and Emma were born. Church set about designing the new property, combining the practical and the aesthetic. The farm would produce a profit. The landscape would be picturesque. To begin his landscape composition, Church had thousands of trees planted on the slope of the hill above the cottage.
The country is very lovely, and the grand scenes which encircle my farm are in their summer drapery. I shall be happy to have the opportunity to show you the beautiful views I look daily upon.
Church continued his grand depictions of nature on canvas, working in his New York City studio as well as in the studio on the farm. With continuing success, Church was secure in both his professional and personal life. Suddenly, in 1865, both children died in a diphtheria epidemic. Frederic and Isabel were devastated. Still, the young couple hoped to have a family, and a year later, Frederic was born. The Churches commissioned Hunt to design a more substantial house for the larger family they planned. The architect chose the French chateau style. Church chose a site near the summit of the hill above the farm, a parcel he had always hoped to buy. Just before an extended trip to the Middle East and Europe, Church's vision became reality.
I have just purchased the woodlot on the top of the hill. I want to secure, if possible, before I leave, every rood of ground that I shall ever require to make my farm perfect.
You approach the house by a fine semicircular driveway. The house is of 2 stories with 2 towers. Beside the arched and ornamented doorway hangs a bronze ring suspended by a chain. This is a doorbell. An inscription in Arabic above the door will probably meet your eye, the interpretation of which is, "Thou art welcome."
Traveling in the Middle East, the churches were fascinated by the Moorish architecture.
I have got new and excellent ideas about house building since I came abroad. It shall be Persian, adapted to the Occident.
On returning to America, Church immediately set to work.
Sometimes the desire to build attacks a man like a fever, and at it he rushes.
Church changed architects, hiring the well-known Calvert Vaux, but used his plans only as a stimulus. For inspiration, Church consulted books on Persian architecture, and then created designs to suit his own artistic eye. Making sketches for every detail, he experimented with designs, colors, and patterns. The same artistic imagination that Church used to create dramatic landscapes on canvas was now focused on building a home.
A feudal castle which I am building under the modest name of a dwelling house absorbs all my time and attention. I am obliged to imagine Persian architecture, then embody it on paper and explain it to a lot of mechanics.
It took 2 years to complete the exterior of the house. While building the house, Church continued work on the grounds. A lake was created to echo the shape of the Hudson beyond. Carriage roads were laid out to lead visitors from one scene to the next. Additional trees were planted to frame vistas. Church designed every element of the foreground to complement the landscape in the distance, the river, the mountains, and the constantly changing sky.
We are having splendid meteoric displays, magnificent sunsets and auroras, red, green, yellow, and blue in profusion. I have actually been drawn away from my usual devotion to the new house to sketch some of the fine things hung in the sky.
Impatient to be in their new home, the Churches, now with 4 children, moved into the 2nd floor. Fred, Win, Lou, and Downey played in the unfinished interior, as Frederic and Isabel planned every detail of the downstairs decoration. Colors for the rooms were mixed by Church on his palette and were repeated throughout the house. Church returned to his pattern books on Persian architecture for ideas. He created stencil designs to ornament the doors, arches, and borders. Some stencils were highlighted with gold and silver paint to create a shimmering effect. Church often experimented with several designs before choosing one. Considering the furnishings an element of the design, Frederic and Isabel meticulously arranged every room. Exotic and artistic objects were chosen not for their value, but for their emotional appeal and visual effect. Each room was a distinct composition. It took 4 years to complete the decoration of the interior. It was 1876. Church was 50 years old. Throughout, Church continued to pursue his career, but landscape painting was falling out of fashion, an interest in European culture replacing America's love of nature. In response, Church created grand paintings symbolic of ancient civilizations, but to little acclaim. At the same time, he began suffering the effects of crippling rheumatism, making it more difficult to paint. Morning in the Tropics was his last major work. With these changes in public taste and personal health, home and family became even more important to Church.
We have been fixed at home all summer, have had crowds of visitors, and I have accomplished a great deal on the place.
Breakfast began punctually at 8. Family and guests would meet in the dining room, which also served as a gallery for a collection of paintings Church called his old masters.
Exquisite flowers arranged only by Mrs. Church are always on the table, and every plate and pitcher and napkin is chosen for its beauty or prettiness.
After breakfast, all would gather in the sitting room for a round of Bible reading.
St. John, chapter 15. I am the true vine.
It was a touching little ceremony which chimed in well with the beautiful surroundings in the house and the scenery outside.
For the rest of the morning, activities outdoors beckoned. After lunch, there was time for quieter pastimes and indoor pursuits, for correspondence, for naps and novels. Between 3 and 4, everyone would assemble richly dressed on the piazza, porch, or umbra, whichever spot commanded the best view.
I am not going to describe the sunset to you, but I felt that we ought to be looking at it on our knees.
Following dinner, family and guests would often gather in the court hall for charades and music, tableaux and recitations.
On Saturday evening, I did the Elixir of Youth. Mrs. Warner played soft music. After gliding down the stairs, I stood with a background of old idols and armor and 2 great bronze cranes and tapestry, lighted by tall standing lamps. The effect must have been perfect.
The Church's home framed the rhythms of daily life. It nurtured and protected their family. From a fortress treasure house in ancient Persia, thought by some to overlook the Garden of Eden, the Churches chose a name for their home. They called it Olana.
I have made about 1 3/4 miles of road this season, opening entirely new and beautiful views. I can make more and better landscapes in this way than by tampering with canvas and paint in the studio.
As the years passed, Church's career continued to wane. His crippling rheumatism worsened, and Olana became his primary canvas. In 1888, at the age of 61, Church began designing a new wing for the house. The addition included a studio.
I am, of course, very busy superintending the new studio. I wonder if I shall work as hard in it as I do in erecting it.
Church lingered over the design and building of the new wing. He closed the New York studio he had rented for 30 years and shipped its contents to Olana. After 3 years, it was finally completed.
I inaugurated the studio. Filled with enthusiasm, I attacked my first canvas, and an iceberg scene is the result. The best, I think, I ever painted.
But now, there was only occasional interest in the work of Frederic Church, the man who had once been America's most famous artist.
Mr. Church admits that his house will never be completed, at least as long as he lives. For every year, he conceives some plan by which he can add to its convenience or attractiveness. The Boston Herald, September 7th, 1890.
Having completed the studio wing, Church transferred the management of Olana to his son Louis, but continued making improvements. In 1899, Isabel died. Church died 11 months later at the age of 73. The year was 1900. Frederic Church painted landscapes that captured the thoughts, desires, and ambitions of a young America. They portrayed a paradise that Church envisioned as fresh from the hand of God. At Olana, Church brought this vision to life with pencil and brush, brick and stone. High on a hill, he composed a home for his family, an artistic masterpiece in the midst of nature.
This place you have never seen. I only wish and wait for an opportunity to take you there of a summer evening when the sun's rays slant across the hills. If you don't pronounce the views most beautiful and wonderful, then deprive me of palette and brushes.
Olana is a magical world. When I think of Olana, I think in terms of Central Park and creating art out of nature. And I think Olana, you can think of it and its landscape very much in that tradition.
Frederic Church's story extends beyond the borders of Olana. We know that he was the Parks Commissioner at one point in Central Park. We also know that with Olmsted and Vaux and others, he championed the creation of the first state park in New York, the Niagara Reservation, which was a designed landscape around a wilderness natural wonder. And it was arguably the prelude to the national parks movement.
Olana is incredibly significant as one of the most important picturesque style landscapes in the United States. And what makes it most exciting, I think, is the fact that Church was involved in the design of the house, the design of the landscape, used the site as his painting studio, and considered his landscape design one of his great works.
Starting about 10 years ago was when our major initiatives towards restoring the entire 250 acres started. We had to start with the main house and the actual buildings, but at the same time, we knew that we needed to tackle the landscape as well. What we see in front of us here is Mount Moreno. 2 years ago, you would not have seen. A church deliberately had this whole area open so that you could see Mount Moreno, which was revered as a favorite spot for many of the Hudson River School painters.
It's a 250-acre design composition, and the composition consists of orchards, the farm, more than 5 miles of carriage drives, pastures, meadows, woodlands, and it was all designed around its views, what we call the Olana viewshed today.
Over the past 20 years, we have had to work hard with our neighbors and colleagues to ensure that this viewshed is protected.
As a designed historic landscape, Olana is in terrible condition. The great thing about Olana is that it's largely intact and can be restored, and as a public resource, it should be restored.
We really look at this with such excitement, the actual restoration being the hard but exciting work, almost an open canvas for us to interpret and share the excitement about this integration of art, landscape, architecture, and conservation. The story is all right here. It is our mandate to teach these theories and ideas to the next generation.